try to put it into presentation mode. I wanted to, really think about some of the processes that I go through when trying to come up with a research project or actually execute a research project. And I was trying to figure out, how to best create this timeline. And I realized today, as I was thinking about it more, that it's not this linear. it's more squiggly around all of this. But just for simplicity, I tried to create this linear pathway from the frustrations that I've had with, various aspects of clinical practice, and then how those have been developed into concepts, interventions, grant proposals. And this is where it becomes kind of fuzzy, because a concept, intervention, development, and grant proposals sometimes is like all happening at once. And then recruitment, implementation, evaluation, dissemination, and then sometimes after dissemination, and this is kind of where I'm at, where it can feed back into the frustrations again, and how we restart the cycle of, all the things that we didn't do correctly or want to improve upon, and essentially redo some of these steps in a different population. So this is basically kind of the overview of what I'm going to be talking about. And if you if you look at the presentation from yesterday, you'll see that I talk a lot about frustrations and how those led to many of my projects, and specifically around how we can revise and improve the current systems of care, which I think during the pandemic, we've really come to realize things can change and there's nothing that's static. So to talk about these steps and, like the various aspects of these steps, I thought I would talk through one of my projects that was specifically around telehealth and video counseling. And it was a project that was called Youth to Text and Telehealth for Engagement in HIV Care, or Y2Tech. And specifically, the goal of it was to look at it was a pilot project to look at a tech-based method to decrease substance use, improve mental health, improve engagement in HIV care among 18 to 29-year-olds living with HIV in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I just want to highlight that I actually wrote technology-based method in the grant application. I actually didn't even say what I was going to do, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't, but luckily it worked in this situation. So basically, the frustration for me at the time was that there was, clearly a lot of disparities in care among youth and young adults living with HIV, and mainly because the services weren't adaptable to the needs of youth. There were no tech-based services, as far as I knew, within various clinics or tools that could help reach and engage youth, specifically youth living with HIV. And generally, there was a lot of lack of mental health and substance use interventions and counselors that were trained in, kind of the youth culture, and also the services that were available for youth living with HIV were, housed in the same spaces that were for older people living with HIV, or in areas, and I don't know if anyone here knows San Francisco. We have the Tenderloin area. That's there's a lot of drug use and substance use, and it's oftentimes, I've heard in my research projects that just being in those areas is a trigger for a lot of the youth who have to deal with substance use. And so and also, on the other hand, the mental health and substance use services are oftentimes difficult to schedule or reschedule, and there's really no tailoring to the needs of youth. And again, there's very little training among counselors to provide services directly to youth. So these were some of the frustrations that I was seeing within our clinical practice. And so I bring in community involvement here, even though I have community involvement across the top. That is basically essentially community involvement really should happen at all aspects and all steps from frustration to dissemination, and back again. And these are really, when I talk about community involvement, I don't mean specifically community-based organization. I mean, it's like the overall community, including the physicians and the mental health providers and the substance use, interventionists, and like the bigger community of partners who are also interested in improving services, interested in research, and maybe even willing to participate in various projects. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. And I think this really just helps to enhance the relevance of the research and increase acceptance and reach and the impact later on when some results become available. And one thing that I talked a little bit about yesterday, which I think is also great, is just to have an idea of the capacity of the community partners, for example, from a community advisory board, to see if there's various members who we had a graphic designer. The one I talked about yesterday was a graphic designer, and he helped us develop really beautiful designs for talking about HIV cure for that project, or social media influencers. So folks who'd be willing to, for example, post on Twitter, and we had that a lot with several of our participants, and they help get the word out on some of our study results, and also paper, and also for recruitment. And this can also be assessed during the application. We actually, for my youth advisory panel, we actually have this application process where folks have to complete and to talk about what they've already done within the community and what are some, maybe special skills they have. So it might be a nice place to evaluate what are some of the other, capacities they have. And so in relation to the study Y2 Tech, what, kind of the involvement that I had of the community was that pre-grant, I conducted a bunch of qualitative interviews with youth living with HIV about specifically around how they wanted to receive various counseling. And in that case, I actually acted as the pharmacy counselor, because I'm PharmD trained as well. And the next slide has some of the results. And then within the study, we also had the youth advisory panel that we met with about once or twice a year, as well as qualitative interviews that were done with the staff and the clinicians from various clinics that provided services to youth and young adults living with HIV, as well as different organizations. And then finally, a bunch of qualitative interviews with youth and quantitative surveys. So essentially, some of the results that came out of that was that, that telehealth, the participants felt like would be a convenient and efficient way of offering services, that they felt that they were less intimidated than going in person to visits, that it may help improve the quality of their dialogue with their providers. They actually said that they felt like they can disclose more readily some of the treatment difficulties and had more comfort during a telehealth session. And some of the important things for them was to really have youth-friendly services, youth-friendly providers who are non-judgmental, and really some of the barriers that we identified were the system-level barriers of just availability of technology, the capacity for the clinic, and HIPAA compliance that came up repeatedly. And the provider level or staff level barriers were time constraints, familiarity with technology, and youth level barriers were changing cell phone numbers and just their general relationship with providers and staff who also may not have been friendly toward them. And really what was interesting was that even though in our goal for the grant application, we didn't specifically say what technology we were going to use, and we kind of left it open so that we can have a discovery section of our project, became really clear that these video conferencing or video counseling sessions would be very much appreciated with a counselor, and it would be convenient, it would decrease transportation time, decrease financial burden, and maybe result in quick responses for crises, and also from a stigma based viewpoint, it would decrease the participants from running into any acquaintances or community members in the clinic waiting area. So these were some of the, and it's funny, as I was putting the slide together, it was like, this is like 4 papers summarized in one slide. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of work that went into this. Hi,
Can
Joanne.
I can I interrupt
Yeah,
you for a second? Just
yeah, please.
about the putting vagueness in a grant. So when, and I think you said this, but it slipped my brain about when this was this a recent grant? Was this an older grant? And just sort of how did reviewers take the
Yeah.
vagueness?
Yeah. So, okay. So I actually think maybe in 2 slides I have a little bit more about this, but just to answer your question specifically. So this actually was a grant from 2012. And when I say vagueness, I don't mean necessarily like leaving it completely open, like what will be, will be. So it was basically a very detailed description on how we wanted to identify and work with community members and identifying what they wanted and how they wanted to receive the intervention. But in sections of the grant, I provided examples. Like, for example, if it turns out that folks want to receive an app, here's what we have in line, and here's how we'll work with them. If they want to receive, so and also the vagueness, I which I'll talk about in a little bit, also is around the tool. Like, so instead of saying, maybe back in 2000, I don't know, 5, like, we're going to use MySpace, which, kind of makes me cringe every time I see that or hear that in a movie these days, is, leaving it open is like social media. So having both the name of a specific software or a tool, uh, uh, to not be very specific, because that changes so frequently, and it's, there's new tools all the time, but also if there truly is something that you want to have the input from um, the community, is to also offer that moment of um, discovery. And sometimes people do that, like we have these resource allocation programs within the university, and the grants that are allocated specifically for discovery. And that was one way of doing it. The California HIV research program funded this, and they actually are very heavily steeped in wanting to get a lot of community involvement. So it's not the NIH where you kind of like have to come in with everything like polished, it seems like these days. But they actually want a lot of community involvement. So I was able to make a case for it, but at the same time give examples of how it would look um, depending on what path we started going down. So it wasn't like completely open-ended. So essentially for this, we ended up going with video counseling, and we specifically used Zoom because UCSF had a license for it and it was free, and why not? And also we gave the option that if Zoom wasn't working, that we would allow people to use WhatsApp, and also if that wasn't working, to just use regular old phone. And I think, in retrospect, one of the things that I would want to make an edit for future grants is to also allow for an in-person session. But that actually didn't really come up in these, because we were able to, triage everyone through one of these other tools. But I think that's definitely, from an access standpoint, that's definitely another option to allow folks to have in-person sessions. And basically, we narrowed it down to 12 sessions on and addressing mental health, substance use, and HIV care within some format, but also allowing some of the sessions be based on the needs of the participants. So we had done all this formative research and had come up with a menu of options around, families of choice, disclosure, jobs, and we had a menu of options of what could be other things that could be addressed within these 12 sessions, but still have a lens or a focus on mental health, substance use, and HIV care within those menu options. And of course, text messaging is always kind of the sprinkle on top, that there's always text messaging, uh, communication with participants as far as checking in as far, timing of the intervention and goal setting. That was all done through text messaging. So as far as a grant proposal, and sorry, I'm just going to make myself smaller there. As far as a grant proposal, I really wanted to focus on some of the things that I think would be important, and really considering how the project will be responsive to changes in technology. And that's kind of part of what I was responding, Joanne, to your question. And because, really like narrowing down exactly where you're going to be using is sometimes also not great. And it may not keep up with the culture that's changing. And also, again, from the time of submission to funding, there could be many years. And there really needs to be a plan for changes in technology. And then just being really explicit, I see a lot of grants, I'd like basically say cell phones, and it's like, well, what kind of cell phone? Is it a smartphone? Is it not a smartphone? So just like the being explicit, like as far as, for example, if you're using Zoom, it's, I'll be using a video conferencing tool that's, HIPAA compliant, maybe instead of Zoom, but still being specific in what the tool is. And then, as I said before, maybe instead of the exact technology. So I catch myself doing this instead of, saying Zoom is, using video counseling, or instead of saying Venmo, like, banking app. But so you're specifying what the technology is without actually giving the name. And then also I've learned this a hard way, and I see it now in many grant applications. A lot of technology is not innovative anymore. So in the innovation section, really keeping the innovation section of a grant short is better. You don't need to write a lot. And really more talking not about how the technology is innovative, but maybe how it's reaching a specific area, specific research area, or specific population, or how it can be tailored is more innovative than the technology. And another issue that I often find is that it's almost sometimes like the technology is really cool, and like we're trying to plug it into this area, versus this is the need, and that's why and the technology is responding to that area versus the other way around. I'll just pause there real quick. Any thoughts or questions around that? Or anyone write a grant recently where they got dinged on the innovation section?
I'll just add that we're writing our CFAR renewal application, and that was one of the comments from our external advisors was the technology itself is, and working in technology is actually not that novel anymore. It may have been when we started 10 years ago, but everybody's doing Zoom now, and everybody's doing digital health work.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll add that in our last technology mHealth application, we use very basic, simple SMS, and it's often a challenge to convince the reviewers that you need to use something that's so simple. And there's actually a back-end platform behind that. But what I was advised in our resubmission that worked was to really just focus on what was different, thinking about the use case and the population was what was really changing. And so the intentions were different, what adaptations to how we were delivering the intervention, in the dosing, timing, frequency, dynamic nature.
Yeah.
Those were the things that we played up in the innovation section rather than the technology. And then instead we focused on our experience and history working with the platform, that we kind of knew what we were doing, but that the technology, I totally agree that it's sometimes hard because people want to see that it's fancy. And I actually really appreciated what you said yesterday about the apps, and there's still a kind of pressure of well, apps are so great, but many people who have used apps know that they have a lot of limitations. So you are kind of threading that needle, I feel for the reviewers to convince them that the sexiest technology isn't always best, and a lot of times simple is better.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And I actually just have a problem with this term innovation in general too, because realistically, nothing is really innovative. It's actually, it's a hard term. It's kind of there's no new stories. All the stories have been told, and you're just repeating stories. And yeah, I find that to be a difficult section to write in the grants, and I always try to keep it really, really short, like, maybe a paragraph. And because I find that to be the area that could be that folks get dinged on the most, because they try to you know make things look too fancy. And for the folks who weren't there yesterday, what I said about apps was to not make an app. That was my summary of developing apps. So okay, so moving on to grant proposals, really considering. Oh yeah, so this comes up a lot. Thinking about resources to host reports, maintain, and support technology after data are collected. This comes up a lot, particularly for many of my colleagues who are trying to incorporate technology-based methods into their projects. And it's basically like thinking about when the money is done from your grant, how is this going to be a standalone thing? When, for example, with apps, there's always a need for maintenance and support or updates. For a lot of these tools, there is a constant need for, or like, for example, for social media interventions, there's always a need for moderation. Who is going to pay for that moderator, and where are they going to get their training from, for example? So thinking about these resources that later on you'll need for an intervention, I think is always important. And then really providing details on the how you're going to increase inclusion of those who may not have those tools and services. And that's basically why I made that point about with the video counseling is offering this option of just using a telephone, or if that's not available, meeting up with people somewhere to have a session with them. I think that's always important. Of course, there's like no way to have full inclusion of everyone at all times, but really making an effort to increase inclusion. And yeah, lots of figures and images. I think reviewers definitely like that. And then one thing that I actually really like to see in grant applications as well, and I try to practice is just how you're going to disseminate some of this technology. And it always, people always ask me, like, for example, for my prep project that I talked about yesterday was, should we try to like sell this to like Gilead, I don't know, something. And I was just kind of like, the NIH paid for this, and it's like, public funded essentially. So it really needs to be free. And so that's why most of the stuff all the tools that I developed are, if anyone emails me about them, I give them the source code or have them on websites for like, various tools for dissemination. And I just really find it difficult when, folks latch on to their technology as if, it's, anything that no one else can develop. And oftentimes, that becomes difficult when dealing with NIH grants to keep that for yourself. And then also just keep submitting grants. I don't know how many folks here are, postdoctoral fellows or junior investigators, but this has been, I think, I feel like senior investigators and our mentors can do a better job in telling us about all of their the times that they have failed and have not received grants. And I just really want to have a session where like we just have all the full professors come and talk about all the times that they had grants rejected. So I'll just say right now, my middle name is rejection. I've had so many grants rejected, and I think the main thing with this world is really not being smart. In fact, it's just being persistent. I think a lot of folks are. There are a lot of smart folks, but if you're not persistent, it's it's not the easiest job to live in. So let's see. Here we go. And these are some of the photos that I had, or pictures that I included in some of my prior grant applications. This was a project that I did with IDEO. It's like this company in San Francisco who develops tech-based solutions. And I just like, for some of my grant applications, I was just like taking photos of the wall to, just to show what we'd worked on, or like creating my own wireframes, just to like, make it seem more tangible. This is for the prep project that I had. And then just really quickly on IRBs, I don't have a lot to, I didn't have IRBs in my little continuum of frustrations to dissemination, but they're definitely important because oftentimes they don't receive a lot of training on tech-based solutions. So it's really, and there's tech-based solutions are so fast-paced and evolving. So really trying to have explanations of the technologies and the safety precautions within the IRB applications. And, again, having what I've been doing, in fact, also just to like make things like as easy as possible, like including all of the images that I'm going to use for anything, for any like recruitment, for, talking about the project, all of the images and all the possible texts for advertisements, email communications. And basically I just say that these will be mixed and matched. So like, just kind of like here's the world of all the images and messages that can be included in the study, just to make it easier on myself and the IRB. And then, and the details of the recruitment, screening, and enrollment process, I think, are always important. I'll tell you why in a second, because, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, specifically related to screening. I try as much as possible to have a super short consent form document at the beginning of a survey where you just kind of like, if you click next, you're consenting. Or I've been using DocuSign more recently now, which actually think that it's been relatively easy. I thought it would be way more difficult, but it's been pretty easy to use for most participants. I also just started increasing the N on my proposals. I find that we like started getting a lot of folks recruited to some of my studies, and we had to fill out a bunch of IRB notices. So I just like have been increasing my N for the IRB application, just so we don't have to report that we went over our recruitment goal. And then, let's see. Yeah, and then I basically try to include any sort of data from my own studies or prior articles about risk benefits of particular tech-based solutions. For example, for Y2 Tech, I talked about all the pre-study data that we had around how participants really wanted to receive mental health and substance use counseling via telehealth. So just my little thing on IRBs. So coming to recruitment, and this was something that I focused on yesterday a little bit, about having a multi-pronged approach for online and offline, both having online social networks and social media, as well as face-to-face type of recruitment. Banner ads I find don't really work because people don't really pay attention to them. The network-based online referrals or response-driven sampling, I sometimes they work. I found that with youth and young adults, it actually doesn't work very well because a lot of folks told us that they never talk about HIV with their friends, and so they didn't know any other folks living with HIV who are in their age range. So that didn't work too well, even though we had pretty good incentives for people to refer their friends. And then just offering different modes of contact to maximize recruitment. So for Y2 Tech, we basically had both in-person clinic advertisements, Facebook and Instagram. We did, I have to say, Facebook and Instagram are not great places anymore to recruit. They used to be at some point. We did do Grindr ads. I personally like working with Jacked and Scruff. Grindr, for some reason, is also not working very well. So sometimes these online tools that used to work in the past, so there's definitely a trial and error for each study, it seems like, in fact, where, Facebook used to work really well like 10 years ago, it doesn't work so great now, and similar with Grindr. We just had a website which kind of helped some folks to be able to actually see that it's a ucsf.edu website, so we're not some random group recruiting folks. And what I talked about yesterday was for online screening specifically, that there's a lot of fraud and bots, and there's a lot of studies that don't report how they went about figuring out how some of their participants weren't bots or fraudulent responses, and they have these massive sample sizes of in the thousands, and always I take those studies with a grain of salt, because it's actually really difficult for online studies to completely get rid of bots and fraudulent responses. So I gave some options yesterday, and we actually used some of those options in this study. So in addition to having that reCAPTCHA thing where you're like clicking on the different photos that have, like say a bike or a crosswalk, we actually had, for the online section of the study, we actually had our participants upload their HIV status and age verification. So the age verification document was, their ID card that has their name and their date of birth. And for the HIV status verification, it could be their pill bottle medication vial that has their name and the name of the antiretroviral that they're on. It could be a letter of diagnosis from their provider that they could take a photo of and text message to the study, or it could be a lab report, again, that has their name and a viral load on it. And they could take a photo of all of these and send it to the study for verification. And that's basically how we were able to verify age and HIV status. And, again, I showed some images yesterday of, various folks who had uploaded very real looking IDs, and like the ID photos like Obama or Chris Hemsworth or someone famous, which I was really applauded folks for taking the time and knowing how to use various tools to create these ID cards. And the other thing that what I didn't talk about yesterday, which I thought was interesting, was that for some of our treatment projects like Y2 Tech, we actually had folks upload a photo of their, say, Truvada. So say they were on PrEP. So technically they, met one of the HIV status criteria. So we had to ask them to, maybe send us a photo of like the other component of the antiretroviral therapy, just to make sure that they were in fact living with HIV. And then finally, just reviewing the information from screening surveys to look for, these inconsistencies in name, email addresses, phone numbers, and IP addresses. So I just want to pause really quick there. Any comments or questions about that? I know sometimes asking for these verifications sometimes makes folks cringe a little. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that, and what methods you may have used for online recruitment to try to deal with bots and fraudulent responses. Anyone? No? All right, moving along. And okay, just wanted to quickly bring this up, working with the industry. Budgetary concerns is always number one for me. And this is totally like, I'm, was born and raised in the bazaar. So I'm really good at haggling. But I just want to put this out there that please haggle. There's, I think, a lot of various industries want to work with researchers and with universities, and oftentimes, for both the text messaging platform that we use for the Y2 Tech study, for a project that I have coming up using artificial intelligence. We have limited funds and oftentimes can't afford the large sums of money that a lot of these industries require to use their tools. So, oftentimes I'll ask them how much it would be for the number of participants that we're looking for, and I'll go back to the budget and just say, well, thank you so much for this, and we only have $2,000. Like, can you make it work? And you would be surprised. I would say 95% of the time, people come back and say, "Yeah, we'll make it work," or "Can we increase by this small amount?" And we can reach some middle ground. But that I highly, highly recommend. Trying to work with the industry to reduce prices. Any comments on that or any thoughts on that? I actually worked with IDEO as well, and they're extremely expensive group. I don't know if you all have heard of them, but they're basically the group that created the mouse. Like the mouse that we use in our computers, they basically were like the design group behind that. So they do these really fancy schmancy designs. And so I just really wanted to work with them. And I was like, I got this small amount of money and can you make it work? And they totally made it work. So having their name be a part of my project and having them, having played a part on my project by itself, really lent a lot of credibility to the findings as well.
I think that's one of the money is one of the things that we all have a lot of challenges with around programming and technology, because that is not a skill that most of us probably have learned, and so we need to rely on other people, and those folks don't necessarily want to work for NIH dollars. So I think that people here have come up with different strategies. I think trying to partner with some of our academic computer science folks, but that's actually, I think, a huge challenge of everybody, all of us want to be doing this work. And the first app I designed, I think I had $10,000 to design that app, right? I mean, the things you can build for $10,000 are not what people are seeing in the marketplace. And so there's I think that's one of the biggest challenges for us in public health and research and all that, to build things that are going to be interesting and useful and that people will want to use on a regular basis.
Totally. Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of I feel like a lot of these companies really want to have a public health focus, and they want to have it's actually good for their portfolio to say that they're working with universities. So there's an incentive for them to also offer discounts. So I always, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, but I think it's worth bringing it up. And also, the other thing that I found recently, which I thought was interesting, was there's a lot of universities. So, for example, for my app, I was trying to figure out how to best go about marketing it without costing anything for the participants. And there's actually this class at UC Berkeley where, that's what they do. The students actually look for various ways of marketing technology, and they took on my app as one of their projects. So it was kind of also nice to being able to work with students and getting this consulting essentially from them without actually having to pay for it. So
do you or the CFAR at UCSF or UCSF have a partnership with industry? I mean, that's one of the things that I can see. It's sort of hard for each individual investigator to go out and be like, hey, Microsoft, want to partner for public health, that it maybe takes a larger coalition. Is that something that you've ever been part of?
I am not aware of it if there is. Yeah, I'm not aware of it. I mean, usually I've either helped colleagues get discounts or done it myself. I'm not aware of any UCSF thing, but also I have to say that most of the people that it's not been Microsoft, for example, it's been this small group, for example, the text messaging company that I worked with was Mozio, and they're like a smaller text messaging, not very well known, but they offer a really good service. And so for them, it was kind of like, oh, great, we'll be able to, like, our name will be mentioned in your publication. So we'll get, recognition within, and it's HIPAA compliant and blah, 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 and it's user friendly. So we'll get some advertisements through your research to other researchers. So, and also like be able to, build our own portfolio of working with public health. But no, and honestly, like, I'm happy to chat with anyone offline about this more. But that's usually been my take is, just going back to the industry and just saying, this is how much I have, like, can we make it work? And yeah. Anyway, so moving along for implementation and evaluation. So this is, I think, one of the areas that I need the most help with as far as working with implementation science researchers, and I've really come to realize how important that is. And really having a great framework for implementation is really important, specifically for technology, because there's so much feasibility, acceptability, usability, adaptability, sustainability that really needs to happen at every step of the way. And also one thing that I am a huge proponent of is having pilots within the pilots, if that's at all possible, and being able and adapting interventions as they go along, specifically for pilot studies when, it's like things are still, not solidified and there's, more malleability to the intervention. But one of the pilots that I did within the pilot for Y2 Tech specifically was to ask folks we basically did a randomization within the randomization to have the first session for the one group be in person and then the rest be online versus having it all be online. And the reason for that was that in the formative research, some folks had said, it'd be really nice to see the counselor in person so we can build rapport and then have it all online afterwards. So we had this randomization within that, and essentially what we realized was that it really made no difference from what people's acceptability of the project was, whether they met the counselor in person for the first session or if they didn't. So it was kind of nice to have this sort of like pilot within the pilot type of a approach. And as I said before, having these options for tools, meeting locations, hotspot devices is really important. So as far as the evaluation, I really want to focus on fidelity, and I have more about fidelity in the next slide, but really trying to figure out what the dose of the intervention is, and sometimes just because someone the message has appeared before them doesn't mean they've read it and understood it. So really, and so this is so difficult within tech-based approaches, is how do you measure engagement? So, like there's always these random, or not random, but these ways of getting around exposure. So how many logins, the length of time spent on a site or in an app, what are the interactions with questions or quizzes or posts? Did participants refer people? So were they so engaged that they wanted their friends involved? And also, any sort of acceptability of the interventions or measures of the overall quality of the interactions and experiences, but always really difficult to get at true engagement with a tool, and also sustained engagement, which I think is probably the most difficult thing with apps. So this is from Y2 Tech. We had these like very detailed Qualtrics surveys where the and I just have a little snippet of it here. So the counselor, after each session, would fill in these surveys per session, just to see, basically talk about like what they talked about. Did they set a goal? And then also just details of feasibility of like, how was the quality of the sound? How was the quality of the video? How many times did we get disconnected, or did we have to move to a WhatsApp or phone type service? And then as far as acceptance, having these, we had session ratings for every single session. The participant received text messages immediately after the session to ask them whether that they felt that the session was right for them, if they felt like they were heard and understood by the counselor. So a lot of details around feasibility, acceptability, and just fidelity of the intervention went into Y2Tech. And then finally, as far as incentives, or this is not finally, close to finally, this comes up a lot when I'm talking to other early career investigators in UCSF. Is how can we increase engagement through incentives as well? So one of the things that I've worked with a lot and I think is really helpful is gradually increasing incentives with longer engagement. So like maybe if the first session is, the incentive is $30, then maybe having like $50 for the last session, like 6 months from now. And also, so not just with like the length of the actual time someone is responding to questions, but also how far away from baseline we are to try to increase engagement. The other things that I've done is a lottery system. So like either for a short survey or for like monthly check-ins with patients, participants to ask about their contact information, particularly if someone is in a control group or a waitlist control arm, is to send them text messages about updating their contact information. And if they respond, they get entered into this lottery system where they can, win a gift card or something at a specific time point. And then having options for incentives. So I talked a lot about this yesterday of like using these banking apps specifically for providing incentives instead of gift cards. So for Y2Tech, we worked with ClinCard, which is this renewable kind of like a credit card, if you will. Even though I think it's a great service, we found it very difficult for our participants. They lost their cards very frequently, and with each lost card, there's an added cost to replace the cards, and the service itself is pretty expensive. This was actually also another industry, Joanne, that we went up to, and I basically said, I only have this much money, and they were able to reduce some of our costs, thankfully. But it was clunky for us. And we did offer e-gift cards, and the lottery monthly was for updating the contact information was great to improve engagement for the folks in the control arm. So my thing right now with incentives is as much as possible to try to use these banking apps to provide incentives. And I just want to pause real quick. There are any comments on that? Or experiences of folks for offering incentives? Do you all are you all able to use Venmo or PayPal or Cash App at?
I was so going to ask you about that. Like, I haven't explored that. I thought that was really interesting. I wrote it down because we have the challenge, everybody wants cash, and we can't give cash except in really uncommon circumstances. And so, it's cash, or if it's remote, we're trying to do Amazon gift cards because of Amazon lockers, but people don't like Amazon, so we do, Safeway or other places. So I don't know. Has anyone at the U tried Venmo before? I'm really intrigued by that. We obviously still have the same issue with if you give a certain amount of money, it has to come by check, and we need a social security number, and that can be a barrier.
I love that idea. As we
petty
are,
cash. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I love that idea, and I too was making notes to think about. I only have one domestic project, but it isn't related to eHealth. But yeah, just to see. It seems like this should have come up before, like for research, but maybe it's just like all the university rules that are prohibitive that don't allow that, or maybe they haven't progressed to think about these apps. But I know like a lot of questions have come up around like taxes. I don't know if that is like part of the issue, or if that has come up, but there's no way to really track people in the same way if it's cash. I don't know if that's come up for you or not.
It's over a certain amount, and off the top of my head, I can't tell you what it's a few $100.
It's like $600.
Yeah, it's
I know what the limit is, but I just don't know if like it matters like the mode of distribution of funds, if it's like a gift card versus cash, if like that matters for some reason.
So do you all have petty cash then? Can you give petty cash? No.
Very, very uncommonly, you have to justify it, and it requires multiple levels of sort of oversight in order to do it. I have it as one of my studies, but it is a bear, and they really try to discourage it because of all of the oversight requirements. So cash is really sort of a.
But we can do it internationally, which is interesting. Like,
well, I mean, we do petty cash a lot, and they actually really like petty cash. And I think so I made this comment yesterday too, but like petty cash is, first of all, like way less safe sitting in someone's drawer in the university, and there's very little oversight. Like, they do these petty cash check-ins, but it's like with Venmo or PayPal or Cash App, you basically have a record of every single transaction, so it's way safer in many ways. And the protocol we created for it is identical to petty cash, except that it's like online. And the thing that we tried to really make, a couple of cases that we made for this for the university, one was really to have them see the double standard that they were having. Like, why is it okay to give an Amazon gift card where like that's still funds versus this? So like, how is that different from a tax perspective if you're like still providing funds? The other thing is that there's a lot of equity issues, which I think came up through the pandemic, that like people can't pay for their phone bill or their rent with an Amazon gift card. And frankly, we have a lot of folks who, are unstably housed and, may not have an address to like get something from Amazon to deliver to them, like, or even a computer to order something on Amazon. So it really brought up a lot of equity issues, and we really tried to like reveal these double standards of like, oh well, so, and then why are we giving Amazon all this money, like, or Safeway or Target, like, it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. And so I think ultimately it really comes down to a comfort again with technology and just trying to educate folks around how technology can be used. Speaking of like, educating IRBs, I think it really comes down to that. One of the things that we also tried to do was to show that it's as far, because they brought up another comment they brought up was that, it can result in like disclosures of HIV status or disclosures and participation, but there's options on all of these apps where you can keep all the interactions private. So it's not like broadcasting to the entire world who's getting money and from where. So I think we basically have made a really good case for using them, and I hope it becomes something that gets picked up by the university. So far we have 2 pilots that we did for this. So let me know if you need any help with protocols.
My team, but Venmo scares me because it's non-retrievable money. So there's no, unlike with a credit card, it is not returnable. If it's out of your bank account, you Venmo to the wrong person, it's gone. So
that's correct, except you can set up a check at the end where before you transfer the funds, you have to enter the last 4 digits of someone's phone number. So that's actually the check that we had for the transactions, to make sure that the last 4 digits of someone's phone number matched what was in Venmo. So anyways, there's like ways of like improving that as well. Yeah. So, and then finally, dissemination, and like this is, I don't even need to get into the details of this because I think everyone here knows all the various social media outlets, but I've been trying to use more of my university social media outlets versus my own or the studies social media, just to get more eyes on a paper or a product. And trying to publish more in open access journals as much as possible, even though the costs are insane sometimes. So that's been a big barrier. So, and these are basically some of the papers and presentations from Y2 Tech that ended up coming out. And really the next step, and this is really going how like the feedback loop for projects kind of continues. So now we're offering a modified version of Y2 Tech now called I2 Tech because it's for all ages as part of a HRSA grant for various Ryan White clinics. So that's really exciting because 12 clinics applied for it and they can fund around 5 to 6 of them. So that's exciting to actually see it come to life in the real world setting. I've applied for an R01, which has been scored, I don't know if good enough to be funded, for combining Y2 Tech with an app that I created called Wise, and really just trying to address different barriers of care. And this is why I think apps by themselves are not good interventions. So Wise really gets at medication management, community resources, and social isolation, whereas Y2 Tech is more focused on mental health and substance use. So I think together they're potentially more powerful because they get at different barriers to care. And then the future consideration, and I think I saw Stefan on this call, which we were on a little discussion a few days ago about how to potentially adapt this intervention to include youth who may be on or interested in starting PrEP. So taking a more status neutral approach to this for a grant for California. So we'll see how that goes. And just, a bunch of folks that I want to acknowledge, and I'll just stop sharing because I would love to get all your feedback and any thoughts on any of this.
I missed some of the introduction of this, but having had the conversation with you earlier this week, I have some sense of what you covered. So just wanted to say hello again. Thank you for the talk. And I wanted to also ask if you have any experience using paid advertising or boosting of social media posts for dissemination activities specifically.
Oh, dissemination. No, actually, I don't have any. No, I've never paid for advertisements. I usually just try to get my university to keep posting and reposting my tweets or Facebook posts on papers, but not besides advertisement for recruitment. I don't have any experience with paid posts for dissemination.
Okay, it's something that we're exploring here, and I think it would be interesting to hear if there are others who have experience in that area as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't say we've done it beyond recruitment, right? I mean, I think we do the what you're saying you do on social media, ask people to share, hope that your networks share and reshare. But I've paid on social media for recruitment, and that's where it ends. But that doesn't mean that has to be where it ends.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments?
Can I just add, one of the challenges with the paying for dissemination of results is that so often that happens after funding ends. Mm-hmm. And so you'd have to try and come up with a mechanism for how to do that.
Definitely. This is also speaking of funding ending, one of the comments that I'm trying to write this op-ed about publication that oftentimes a lot of, because of the pandemic, so much of non-COVID papers that have been submitted are like kind of put on a back burner or backlog. And it's kind of frustrating because by the time it does get accepted, the grant may have ended, and basically there's not a lot of options for funding. Our university does have a small pot of money for publication fees, but it's very, very small, and a lot of restrictions around it. Any other comments?
Well, we are past time, but I really appreciate you and everybody else being willing to stick around to have this conversation. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite.
Of course. I look forward to seeing what you're doing. I'm going to let you know what happens with Venmo. And I'll share that with anybody and see if that is an actual option for us here at the university or one of the Venmo equivalents. Because again, I think we need better solutions. In fact, we're having this conversation this afternoon in a study meeting about how to disseminate to community, many of whom may or may not have homes. And
Exactly.
yeah, I think important. So I look forward to seeing your work. I followed you on Twitter, so I will see your.
Yay.
I'm not much on Twitter. Twitter is exploration for me. But when you share, I will disseminate.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you,
you all so
everybody.
much. Take care.
Bye.